Hey friends, welcome to story number 2. Our story today is called Harriet Tubman, Part 2. Our words for discussion. First word is conductor. A conductor is a person who led or directed enslaved Africans to freedom during the Civil War using the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman was a famous conductor of the Underground Railroad. Our next word is contributions. Contributions are money, materials, information, or labor given by someone to help others. Example, every year my parents make several contributions to the American Red Cross to help families in need. Our third word is gourd. A gourd is a plant whose hard-shelled fruit is sometimes dried and hollowed out to be used as a tool. Tommy used the hollowed-out gourd to scoop water out of the pond. Our next word is passengers. Passengers enslaved Africans who traveled to freedom on the Underground Railroad were called passengers. Many of the passengers on the Underground Railroad were caught before they could reach their freedom. And our last word for this section is the word rebellious. Rebellious means resisting or fighting, being controlled by someone else. Example, because John would not stay in his room, his parents told him he was being rebellious. In today's Real Loud, you will hear about something called the Underground Railroad. Underground is sometimes used to describe something that is hidden or secret. The Underground Railroad was not a real railroad or locomotives and trains, but like a real railroad, it helped get people or passengers from one place to another. Passengers on the Underground Railroad were trying to get out of the South and go to live in the North, where slavery was not allowed and where they could be free. They usually traveled at night to move through the woods so they would not be seen, and they wanted to keep their movements a secret from plantation owners and slave catchers. People traveling on the Underground Railroad also stopped at stations for rest. A conductor on the Underground Railroad was a leader, helping others on their journey. In today's Read Aloud, you are going to continue learning about Harriet Tubman and her work on the Underground Railroad. In our last story, you heard about Minty's shred of hope that one day she might be able to fight back and possibly win her freedom. Today, you're going to think and predict to see if she actually chooses to fight back and try to win her freedom. The summer air was hot and heavy. There was no breeze to cut the heat, and the shade of the scraggly bushes did little to block the blazing sun. Gnats, mosquitoes, and flies swarmed all around, buzzing and biting. Despite the heat and bugs, the runaway slaves, filthy from head to toe, their clothes tattered and shredded by thorns and branches, their bare feet blistered and cut, slept hard, huddling together in tall grass. As they slept, a woman, a conductor, watched and guarded over them. Even now, as they slept deeply in the bushes, this woman sat upright and alert. Her sharp eyes scanned the forest, and her ears listened for signs of danger. She knew the dangers all too well. The slave catchers were always searching for runaway slaves, lurking in the middle of swamps, hunting for runaways miles away from the nearest house, town, or road, hoping to catch groups of runaway slaves. The slave catchers were paid great sums of money if they caught runaway slaves, and this woman knew very well that the slave catchers would never give up. Why do you think enslaved people would choose to run away? This woman who stood guard over everyone else was Minty, the same Minty who used to sit by the crib hoping the plantation owners' babies would not cry. But people did not call her Minty anymore. People now called her Harriet Tubman. When she grew up, Harriet Tubman did not serve the big house. Perhaps this was because the plantation owners sensed she was a bit rebellious. She always did things her way. So from the time she was a young woman, she was sent to work in the fields, plowing and digging, cutting hay and tobacco, and chopping wood. In time, she became as strong and tough as the person she could be. When the plantation owner died, Harriet Tubman faced a new danger. It was likely that she would be sent off to Georgia, just like her sisters. Georgia was in the deep South, where many of the plantations grew cotton and conditions were even worse for enslaved Africans. Work on the cotton plantations was difficult and performed in all types of weather. They plowed the fields with teams of mules, hoed the soil to get rid of weeds, and harvested the cotton by hand. The cotton had to be picked clean and then made into heavy bales that could be transported away from the plantation and sold. Harriet knew she had to run away for her life in slavery. In order to reach freedom, Harriet Tubman needed to use the Underground Railroad. This was not a real railroad. It was a system of secret routes and hiding places to help enslaved people escape from slavery in the South to freedom in the North. If only there had been a real railroad to freedom, then escaping would have been easy for Harriet Tubman and other runaway slaves. They could have hopped aboard any train and ridden away from the punishment, endless work, and sorrows of a harsh life. In certain ways, the Underground Railroad was like a real railroad. On a real train, there are passengers, or people who travel from one place to another. Runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad were also known as passengers, and as soon as they ran away from the plantation, they set off an incredible and difficult journey to freedom. But runaways could not complete this journey without help from a conductor. On a real railroad, a conductor is in charge of the train. On the Underground Railroad, the conductor guided runaway slaves, leading them through secret paths and taking them to safe houses. These safe houses were known as stations. And like real train stations, they were places where passengers could rest before moving on to their next journey. Many different people provided these stations to escaped slaves, people from both the North and the South who knew slavery was wrong, and even when some former enslaved Africans who had won their freedom and wanted to help others. Harriet Tubman made it safely to freedom in the North using the Underground Railroad. Enslaved Africans like Harriet were free in northern states like Pennsylvania, where slavery was not allowed. But they weren't entirely safe until they left the United States and entered the land north of the United States. This was because the law allowed slave catchers to enter free states in the North to catch runaway slaves and return them to a life in slavery in the South. Harriet did not stay in Pennsylvania for long. She missed her family and friends and could not bear the thought of them remaining in slavery while she enjoyed a free new life. She decided she had important contributions to help to make for those who were still enslaved. So she became a conductor on the Underground Railroad and returned to the South 19 more times over several years, risking her life each time to help other enslaved Africans escape to freedom. Harriet Tubman soon became one of the bravest and most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. Her name became well known among the supporters of slavery. Plantation owners put rich rewards out for her capture. Within a few years, they wanted to stop her stopped at all costs, but she kept going back again and again, helping more and more slaves escape. Harriet Tubman was startled by the distant sound of dogs, and she knew danger was near. "Wake up now, wake up," she urged, shaking the men and women. "Gather up these babies. We've got to get a move on." The men and women sprang to their feet with fear and panic. "Don't you worry now," she assured them. "I know a station not too far from here, but we'll have to move fast, and we'll have to stay in the creek to keep those dogs off our trail." They hustled out the swamp and splashed up the creek, where the dogs would have had a hard time following their scent. An hour later, soaked in sweat and muddy creek water, they arrived in the front yard of a small farmhouse. The runaway slaves hid in the weeds while Harriet slipped through the yard and onto the front porch. She tapped 3 times on the door, waited a moment, then tapped 2 more times. This was a secret knock, so the people in the house would know their visitors was an Underground Railroad conductor in need of help. A white woman opened the door. She signaled for the runaways to follow her into the kitchen coop. There, she lifted up a trapdoor in the floor, revealing a dark hole. "It's not comfortable," she told them, "but nobody will find you here. I have some stew and biscuits and inside and fresh milk. I'll bring it out as soon as the coast is clear." Their hearts raced as they waited in their hideout, expecting to hear the slave catchers' dogs barking any minute. But the dogs never came. Running through the creek had thrown the slave catchers off the trail, and for now the runaways were safe. They wanted to sleep, but when the sound went down, they had to get a move on. There was no time to waste, for nighttime was the only safe time to travel. Outside, Harriet Tubman looked up to the starry sky. She put her arm around one of the children. "See there," she said, pointing upward. "That group of stars up there, it kind of looks like a ladle you might use to scoop water from a bucket. Back where I'm from, we used to call it a drinking gourd. Do you see it?" "I think so," said the child. "Now see the cup of that drinking gourd?" Harriet Tubman asked. "Look at the 2 stars at the end of the cup and pretend you can draw a straight line from those 2 stars straight out into space. If you follow that line straight out, you'll find the North Star. It is always there, right in the same spot. You can always find it if you know how to find the drinking gourd in the sky. Do you know why that star is so important?" "Why?" asked the child. "Because the North Star is always to the north. If we follow the North Star every night and keep it in front of us, then it will guide us north to freedom." And heading to the north and to freedom is exactly what they did. It's time for our questions. Question 1. What information did you use to make your predictions? Were your predictions about whether or not Harriet Tubman could win her freedom correct? Why or why not? Question 2. Why did Harriet Tubman decide to fight back rather than accept her life as an enslaved person? Question 3. How was she able to gain her freedom? Question 4. What was the Underground Railroad's purpose? Was it a real railroad? Who were the conductors on the Underground Railroad? Who were the passengers on the Underground Railroad? What were the stations along the Underground Railroad? Question 5. What were Harriet Tubman's contributions to help enslaved people try to escape and win their freedom? Why did Harriet Tubman choose to be a conductor on the Underground Railroad and risk her own life to help others enslaved?